Good morning. This is the Dr. Obutashaka show. And this morning, we've got a very important topic. We're going to take you on a ride. Some of it may sound like it's the stellar realms, but these are realms inside of you. So the topic for this morning is drawing on the African conception or idea of God to guide our choice between two cultures. So this, unlike the other shows that focused on the specific powers of God that lie within us and the very idea that God is within us, this is going to have a special focus on the African conception of God. And so you have a better idea of the powers that you're drawing upon. And of course, all the religions have ideas on this, and I honor all of them. I'm bringing in the African perspective on that. But before getting into that, I want to note that the show that we had last week with Professor Menu Ampin was a groundbreaking show in which Professor Menu Ampin explored the real Dr. Martin Luther King, dividing him into two parts, the 1955 to 65 period and the 65 through 68, and showing from 65 through 68, he had become a revolutionary. And this is going contrary to the views that the media has created of the Dr. Reverend Martin Luther King. Anyone that was active in the Black Freedom Movement and was undergoing transformation themselves especially would recognize it in the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King. It's very important to understand. Next Saturday, Menu and I are going to be looking at the assassination of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King. We didn't want to start on that, but we want to focus on that so that we're clear about what really happened, because we know that this government didn't particularly like the message that was coming from the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King. So that will be next Saturday. Before getting into the topic for the day, drawing on the African conception of God to guide our choice between two cultures, what I want to do is thank all the viewers for being responsible for this show exceeding 1,000 viewers within less than 5 months. And that's a big achievement. And that means that there are certain things that we'll be able to do with this program in terms of advertising that we were not able to do before. But it also means that we're on the road for moving to higher and higher ground. And I'm bringing on a additional person to my team who will be doing special promotions on 3 platforms: Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube. And today, for the first time, we're on Instagram. So this will be it'll enable us to draw in more viewers. The other thing that I want to respond to is that many viewers have expressed the desire to see all of my books on the Gumroad platform. Up to now, the only book that's been on the Gumroad platform has been The Integration Trap, Generation Gap, Caused by a Choice Between Two Cultures. This book here, and I'll be drawing in part from some of the central ideas coming from this book today in the introductory chapter. And this book draws on the light of God, and it particularly focuses on what's hit Black communities since 1968 as an introduction, and the changes that have been brought to the Black community, leading to a choice between two cultures. So that will be the focus for, that's the focus for one of the books that will be on sale at Gumroad. This book, The Integration Trap, also covers other dimensions of African and African American culture. It goes back to the Twa and shows how they create what I call formative African history or world history. They're the first people in the world to make history. And so I go back before ancient Kemet. Most people start with Kemet and then show how the civilizations that the Twa gave birth to 144,000 years ago, which is the beginning of humanity and the beginning of human history, then gives rise to African societies, including African families. And then I look at ancient Kemet and I look at Asia and the presence of the Twa people in the Americas. The main focus of this book, though, is on how African American culture was formed and what are its salient features, because we've ignored that as a people. And a lot of the crisis we're facing right now, we could handle much better if we had a deep understanding of our rich culture. So this book has been on Gumroad, will remain on Gumroad, and you will get, along with this book, a paper on the sixfold stages to mental freedom. And that's true for any of the other books. At least for one book, you'll get a copy of that. On Gumroad also, we will be featuring The Art of Leadership, Volume 1. And this is in hardback. You'll see the historical figures there: Marcus Garvey, Amilcar Cabral, Ella Baker in the middle, King and Malcolm. This is Volume 1 of a 2-volume work on leadership that took 10 years to write. These are the only books in the modern world on African and African American leadership systems, strategies, and programs. This is not a book on great Black leaders. Volume 2 is out of print, and I'll eventually put it in print again. But right now, what's available is Volume 1. This book focuses on both what it means to be a leader in the context of African and African American culture. What are the qualities of leadership? It focuses on the state of our community. It focuses on group dynamics. When you're in a group, how do you run it? It focuses on economic development. And it focuses on a number of other areas of organizing. I've established a leadership training institute called Parank House of Life, Ella Baker, Amilcar Cabral Leadership Training Institute. And so over time, I'm going to be doing leadership training on this show. And in fact, some of the stuff we're covering now is providing a foundation for that. And the foundation for all this training will be the sixfold stages to mental freedom that we'll be taking people through in depth at different times. So this book took me 10 years to write, these 2 volumes. And at that time, it reflected 30 years of organizing experience at the level of mastery of not losing any battles. And I've been in a lot of organizations and gone through a lot of battles. So this is the second one that's available. The third one that will be on Gumroad is this book, Return to the African Mother Principle of Male and Female Equality, Volume 1. This book took 5 years to write, 15 disciplines to write, and like the integration trap, it comes from piping in to God's mind, except what I pipe in to here is a much bigger answer than what I got before in the integration trap. In the integration trap, I get an answer to basically what has been the cause behind breakdowns in African and African American communities. But this vision that the mother principle draws from is a bigger light and a bigger vision. And this bigger light and bigger vision is the one that provides basic fundamental answer to just societies. So this is extremely important. This book is considered a classic. Dr. Theophilo Benga stated that the book is a classic, and the term that I use for African families, the term I use, which is twinlineal, should be in the dictionary. This book is introduced by both John Henry Clarke, Professor John Henry Clarke, who wrote an introductory section, and also by Dr. Asa Hilliard. And so this book is key to the whole question of how do we establish just societies and what's the basis for just societies. Over time, we'll spend quite a bit of time on just this question. Also provided on Gumroad will be a number of DVDs. I know some people now do not have a DVD system, and so they'll also be available on download. And the DVDs that we have here are selling for $14.95 with $1.50 for shipping. One is on Malcolm X, By Any Means Necessary, Revisiting the Legacy of Malcolm X. The book, The Political Legacy of Malcolm X, is now out of print, and it will be some time before I put it back into print. So this DVD is an updated view of Malcolm's current thinking. And it's going through a lot of new material on Malcolm X, El-Haj, Malik, El-Shabazz. The other DVDs or downloads that will be available are: one, Return to the African Mother Principle of Male and Female Equality. In many cases, I have DVDs that follow a book, but they're not a substitute for the book. They provide an introduction and focus on a theme in the book. You really have to get the book to get the depth of what is being covered in these works. This particular DVD is a recording of a speech that I delivered in Memphis, Tennessee, 1995, a few months after this book was published, and about a month before the Million Man March, where I spoke. And this Greater Romani Church, where I spoke, then had 10,000 members, and it was an African-centered church. And so attending this particular presentation was Stokely Carmichael, then known as Kwame Ture, who led the Black Power movement inside of SNCC, Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. We were friends. I led the Black Nationalist wing of the Congress of Racial Equality. So you'll see in this film, this DVD or download, where I acknowledge him. So this is a speech that focuses on certain features of return to the African mother principle of male and female equality. It does not cover the whole book, obviously. And then the other DVD that I have, or DVD download, is Integration Trap, Generation Gap. And this one is, it's one that I delivered in London in 2005. And it's the first time that I began to examine the international dimensions of what the Integration Trap book addresses. The Integration Trap book addresses choice between two cultures and then the history and everything else. But here I'm looking at how that impacted the Caribbean, how it impacted Africa, and how it impacted Africans in Europe. So this is a particularly important piece right here. And then the final one is a speech that I delivered at ASCAT, Association for the Study of Classical African Civilization. This was a plenary address in 1997. And this provides an introduction to the book that I'm finishing right now on Seba. And it's entitled, this is it, Mastering the Masters, Dogon and African-American Mentoring Apprenticeship Systems. So this is an introduction to the mastery system that is central to the book that I'm writing right now on Seba. So these are the different things that you can pick up by going to Gumroad and then just clicking in, and you can pick up these books and we will mail them to you. I saw where someone last week said I should make these available at Amazon. Why should I? And since they're trying to rip you off with a $900 book that's used, whoever is selling it, that's just one indication of why I shouldn't. But the main reason is I do my own writing, my own editing, and my own publishing and distribution. And so this is an African-centered show. So support the people who do this, not someone who's going to come in and rip you off. So that's it on that. So I hope that you check these books out, because reading is like key to everything we cover in this show. And these particular books are like central to the work that I am doing right now. And so the topic for today is drawing on the African conception of God. And this is like the central point, drawing on the African conception of God to guide our choice between two cultures. So we're going to be focusing on the one hand, how Africans view God, but on the other hand, we're going to be looking at how do we use that to better understand the powers that reside inside of us to address current issues facing us that I characterize, or God did, because these words, a choice between two cultures, come through me. They're not my words. And it comes after, I've explained before, for people who have heard this before, after a student asked me a question in class, if our culture is so great, why are so many holes developing in them? And I didn't have an answer. And it was in a moment of humility, it was more than a moment, that God shed this light. And the light said, a choice between two cultures. And I'll just say that that theme is really the theme for what the problem is that hits the African American community and the problem that hits the African world. But God, when God talks to you, God don't just give you a problem, God gives you an answer. And so a choice between two cultures means if you make the wrong choice, that's the problem. And if you make the right choice, that's the solution. But the key point is it's telling you that of all of the forces that have hit our community, the key thing to get straight is they've had the effect of producing cultural changes. And so that's going to be the lens through which we look at our powers, because in the past, the last 4 sessions on God within, we were identifying the powers that we have. And I also want to stress that drawing on the spirit powers, the powers of God that reside in all human beings, is part of what we need. The other part that we need is a healthy sense of self-love, which comes from knowing ourselves. And so these two are very important. And that is something that we get through our own look at ourselves and the way we see ourselves. And the sixfold stages to mental freedom is a system that identifies the stages that we go through when we're undergoing an awakening. And that, by the way, affects all people of color. It has a special way of working with each group because of the way in which oppression is worked in their lives. But basically, people of color, not just Black people, experience, for example, assimilation. And that's one example of the similarities that people of color and African people share on this. In the past shows, I focused on different dimensions of the God that lies within us. And first, the idea of God being inside of us. Then secondly, focused on identifying the heart-mind as a seat of intellectual clarity and also the seat of morality, or ma'at. And then we focused on the heart-mind as the seat of the ka, which is your destiny, and then the seat of your ba, which is your eternal soul. So there are many other powers that we have as people, as human beings. So when we go through this show today and looking at the African conception of God, then it's drawing on those powers. But specifically today, we're going to focus on the specific view that African people have through African deep thought of the view of God and the new African or African American. Now today, and for the last week or maybe 2 weeks, we have been witnessing the trial of the killer cop, Derek Chauvin, for his kneeing to death George Floyd. It's very important that we link this to what we're talking about today, because this hell that we're facing is going on 24/7 in Black lives in this country. And while we look at this trial, it's supposed to be the trial of the cop killer, but it's actually been a trial of George Floyd, the victim of the cop killer. He's been placed on trial. He's been treated as the criminal. He's been treated as the cause of his own death by the defense. And I would say in certain cases by some inadequate prosecution preparation. So this is a microcosm of what our people face in this society today and people of color. We see also the killing of Dante Rice by a female cop who claimed, here she's a plus 20, 25-year veteran, who claimed that she didn't know the difference between a taser gun and a gun. And the whole time she's shooting them, she's offering herself an alibi. You know what I mean? And in the beginning, this version was accepted, you know? But then as a hell broke out, then she steps down and now is being charged for, of all things, manslaughter. The same thing with the cop killer of George Floyd. He's facing lesser charges. That was cold-blooded murder. And they got all these different charges, giving juries options to give him as light a sentence as possible. The only hope you really have here is that these blacks hold out and maybe some whites get sentenced. And then the worst part of this is you look at a Carl Rittenhouse, a right-wing kid who's a killer. And if you've seen his fat mother who's packing a automatic weapon, she obviously trained him. He murders 2 Black Lives Matter activists. And the cops let him go and give him water. And they don't charge him until a day or two later. So we see the difference between how whites get to act and take Black lives, and in this particular case, take the lives of Black Lives Matter demonstrators. I think both of those were white that were murdered, while at the same time, the victims of these murders either get nothing done or it takes a worldwide upheaval for a trial to take place. And for the first time in who knows how long, a televised trial. So this is all telling you what we're facing now when we face this reality of what's hitting our communities now. So as we look at what's going on now in Black communities, George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and many, many others are just microcosms of a bigger reality that our communities are faced. At the same time, on the positive side, we see that as these murders go down, as Black people face systemic racist and economic oppression, particularly, and then oppression on every other level, having one of the lowest life expectancies in this country, having one of the highest infant mortality rates in this country, and a host of other things caused by the system of white racism that is bred into every institution in this country. At the same time, we see there's an awakening in the Black community. And we see it manifested in the form of massive movement, which is called the Black Lives Matter movement, which encompasses much more than Black Lives Matter. And that it is coming out of the anger, the concern, and the love of the masses of Black people. Because when George Floyd was murdered, that was a spontaneous eruption showing that Blacks not only care about Black lives, but are willing to put their lives on the line, but also showing that whites, brown, red, and yellow care, particularly young people. And give yourself credit, but for that movement and COVID-19, Trump would be sitting in the White House. And so when we talk about understanding the African understanding or knowledge of God, to understand better the powers that lie within us, we need to understand that we've been flexing some power ourselves, and that power is a power showing hope. I did a show on how Blacks led the defeat of Trump, and I got a racist comment, which I didn't allowed to stay on the platform. But I was glad to see it because it indicated that we had hit more than a nerve. Guy talking about, oh, we didn't defeat Trump, blah, blah. You know what I mean? But for Black Lives Matter, but for COVID, these two things, with Trump bringing in 4 to 5 million new voters, his white butt would be sitting in the White House. So when we address this issue of understanding the African conception of God, so we can better understand the powers that lie within us, understand you are exercising some power, and understand what that power means. And it means that even though we have some serious problems in our community, this humane thing that characterizes our people, this humane feeling for the well-being of others, in this case, for the well-being of Black people. And in this particular case, the humane sense that sisters have for the loss of their brothers, and mothers have for the loss of their children, and Black people have in general, and then other people who have responded. But it is a testimony to the strength of our culture because one of its planks is humanism. That is the care for the human being. I was watching a film recently on life in the hood, and it was a good film because it said a lot about the hell that Blacks are facing. But the filmmaker or the person that wrote the script got something wrong. They thought this was ghetto wisdom. What they said is, in slavery, we learned how to survive, but we didn't learn how to live. That means whoever wrote that script doesn't know anything about Black history, because we didn't just come out of slavery with all the hell we faced. We created a culture, an art form, and then with no material resources, built up the most advanced Black community in the world. When Marcus Garvey came to this country to build his movement, he observed that the African in America is the most advanced African in the world. And why is that? The Africans coming out of slavery knew more than something about survival. They knew something about what it means to be human. They were the most Africans that we produced. As Zora Neale Hurston said, closer to slavery you get, the more African you get, and the more royal and regal you get. We might have been materially impoverished. We were not spiritually impoverished or culturally impoverished. And we survived because we looked out for each other. So get it straight. The hood mentality that's been developed since what's hit us since 1968, that has put our youth in difficult conditions and our community in general, that is largely not the product of slavery. That's forces that have hit us since 1968. So when we see this uprising that is going on right now, it is a reflection of the power of humanism in our culture, but it's also a reflection of the inner spirit power of our people. Amilcar Cabral, who led the liberation movement in Guinea-Bissau and Cape Verde, who you see behind me almost every time I have this show, he made the point that the liberation movements are an act of culture. And so what we've seen happening in our community on the positive side has been an expression of some of the strongest aspects of our culture. And that's also what led to January 6th. The right wing has felt dispossessed since we defeated them in the Civil War, 170,000 Black Union soldiers. I have a show on that, how Black Power defeated the Confederacy, segregation, and Trump. You should go watch that. And that's got good historical footage on it. So what we have to understand is that these movements, particularly this movement that has occurred recently, this Black Lives Matter movement that put Trump out of the White House and is preparing him, hopefully, for the jailhouse, arises from particular powers that we have as a people, and we're not often conscious of them. And the most important power is our location in this country, which puts us in a strategic position to produce change in this country. And because our culture is the popular culture of the United States and the world, when we move, others move. And when we move in this country, our movements go global. Most of us are not conscious of this power. And it's because they go global because it's a just cause. And because people can see in our struggle the oppression they're facing in other parts of the world. So 50 countries rising up. It produced the trial that you're seeing right now, but more important, it changed the occupant in the White House. And that's a singular victory for you, along with your allies. And a special hat off to sisters. And a special hat off to the wise Black people in South Carolina, who, when they tapped Biden, who was losing up to that point, they saw something that some of the more political Blacks didn't see. What they saw is he could win. And I'm going to tell you one thing, don't go against the mass of our people on essential subjects. I'm always there with my people. One reason, because I love them. But the other thing is the group of Black folks is wise and smart. You wouldn't have the Senate but for them. So the issues I'm addressing now, you're going to have to take advantage of those openings that you have right now. And I'll speak of those later. So the fact that you have young people and every other group of people, Black and others, willing to put their lives on the line for the issue of human life, which is human rights, is a powerful statement of the strength of our culture. Now, today, Black communities in the United States, the Caribbean, and in Africa, they're in a position of choosing between what I referred to before as a choice between two cultures. This analysis is the best analysis you're going to get on the problem we're in and the way we get out of it. You hear me? Because it comes from God. I wish I was smart enough to have encompassed everything under a statement, a choice between two cultures. I've mentioned this before, but I'm putting a different emphasis on it today, but mainly so that we can use this to address how do we draw from our inner powers to produce systemic change in this country, starting with changing ourselves. When I asked that question of what had gone wrong in the Black community, God shared the light, which I always get without any words, telepathically, it said a choice between two cultures. God talks to you on your level and when you're ready and when you're humble. And I've been working on this for a long time. And I didn't have the answers because things were falling apart right before our eyes, and it was rapid and it was having effects that we hadn't really figured out. And so a young 18-year-old sister really opened my eyes by asking me a question I couldn't answer. That's part of how you learn. You know what I mean? It's an embarrassing way to learn, but hey, that's what we're here for, learning. So what does this mean? Since '68, powerful hostile forces have hit the Black community and subsequently the African world. And these forces have taken the form of deindustrialization, which I've covered before. I'm addressing this now because this is very important to look at the situation that we have to address now. And what's the effect of these forces on the life of Black people right now, brown people and other people as well, but especially Black people here and globally. So when deindustrialization occurs, jobs leave the Black community, go to the suburbs, but mainly to China and other countries, and good paying jobs leave the country. Person with a high school education or less doesn't have the means to support a family working at McDonald's. And so we see a collapse of Black families starting in '68, from 75% two-parent household the 29% now. Greater erosion between 68 and now than between 1619 and 1968. These forces did it. And I should point out, we're into conspiracy theories and a lot of them. This was not aimed at us. This was aimed at the bottom line for corporations. It had a bigger impact on us because of the nature of racism. And so it hit us harder. We see at the same time that this happens, neoliberalism has been adopted by Reagan. And so that means cutting back on social programs, ending them in many cases. And so now you don't have low-income housing being provided by the government. One of Biden's planks in his infrastructure plan that Blacks need to take advantage of is money for low and moderate income housing. It's not enough to produce all the housing we need, but it's a start. And as somebody that built housing in the 60s, low and moderate, still standing, I know the value of that. In Black communities, we need to be taking those efforts. Some Black churches do that on their own with government money, usually HUD. HUD is largely going out of this business now. But because of the pressure you put on Biden, forcing him to pick a vice president, forcing him to move to the left in ways he had never done before, you need to take advantage of these openings. But the key thing is, we see with neoliberalism, Friedman's program I've talked about before, trying to privatize everything that's provided by the government and basically put all the money in the pockets of very few people. We see that most of the social programs you had before are gone, including welfare done in by Bill Clinton following this same neoliberal agenda. And we also see redevelopment hitting Black communities. We called it Negro removal in the 60s, where Black communities were torn down in part to stop Black resistance movements. And now we see it in gentrification, where a lot of whites are moving back into urban areas in which Blacks occupy. So these are all attacks on our people. And at the same time, as the jobs are gone, as communities are destroyed, not all of them, but too many, Black businesses are uprooted. And we've seen how 2008, we lost housing, which was a source of wealth. And now with COVID, 40% of Black businesses who couldn't get the financing that other businesses got from relief packages. So what we see then is in Black communities, life circumstances are reduced, and particularly for the poor, which is a large sector of our people. Many Blacks going to bed at night hungry. And fewer of them proportionally could get the relief on other levels that other groups could get, or were working in jobs where they were exposed, as Latinos have been, to the public and contracting higher rates of COVID and higher death rates built in to this systemic system of semi-colonial, racist, economic, capitalist oppression. By semi-colonial, I mean that the system that oppresses Black people, we used to define as a colonial system, meaning that an oppressor comes into a nation, takes it over, and runs it. That's colonialism, occupies it militarily and runs it politically, economically, and every other way it can. And certainly, this country is a successful domestic colony. That is, Europeans came from the outside, occupied it, and exterminated 90% of the inhabitants, Native American people. And so from the Native American standpoint, this is a domestic colony. They are colonized. I call our situation semi-colonial because we have aspects of colonialism. But at the same, for example, the way the police occupy our communities, that's an aspect of colonialism. But the thing is, we don't have what's called continuous landmass, which means we're not concentrated in a specific area where we could come together at a certain point, if we had the power, strike for independence. It's semi-colonial. It's got elements of colonial, but it's not the same thing. And we need to be clear when we talk about what kind of system oppresses us. So the point is, these external forces have hit our communities, and this was not intended by our enemy. Do not give your enemy more credit than they deserve. They didn't think we had a culture, therefore they weren't out to create a choice between two cultures, except with drugs. Now with drugs, they knew they were putting in something that would do a death wish on the Black community by taking the youth out, a sector of youth who can't find work, and so their work becomes the underground economy. And that again then puts them in prison. And so this choice between two cultures is largely unintended consequence, and most of our people haven't figured it out. They figured the drug thing out. That is a mad culture, but they haven't figured out how the intrusion of the media into your home when families are weakened shifts values. I talked about this before. So this is the key point, that these external forces that have hit us have put us in a position where if we're going to get out of the situation we're in, then culture is going to be the key thing we have to draw from. And we're in a particularly weak position when we're divided over whether we have a culture, when we haven't evaluated the culture, and when we often don't appreciate the strengths that we have as a people. So these are things that we're going to have to address as a people. Now, Breonna Taylor, George Floyd, they're metaphors for this no good for nothing, racist, semi-colonial capitalist system. And please believe me, capitalism is no good. And I'm not knocking people who have their own businesses. I'm not knocking Black people who are into business as long as they're not doing other Black people in. I understand that's what you had to do to survive. 90% of Black businesses are owned by a single person. And that's the second largest employer of Blacks in this country. And we need more Black businesses, preferably cooperatives, where we can get together and pool our money and where the community has an equal share in the wealth that comes out of that, because that goes back to the culture of African people, which is a communal sharing culture. But I'm going to support a Black business as long as it's positive. And the only group that supports Black businesses are Blacks, by the way. Every other business gets Latinos, Asians, of course, whites, they get support for their businesses from every group. The only group we get consistent support from is Blacks, and we know we could do a better job of that. But that's our sole support base. So when we look at George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, they're metaphors, they're examples for what's happening to a whole lot of our people who are being ground to death through this racist system, who are facing hunger, prison, death, higher COVID-19 rates, and a host of other problems. So when we deal with the choice between two cultures, then we have to deal with how these external forces are operating and how they affect our youth, especially. In this show, I'm concerned about reaching everyone, especially Black people. But the group I'm most concerned about reaching are young Black people. That's why I'm doing the show more than anything, because too many people in my age group, they just talk to their own age group. They talk to the choir and everybody agrees with them and all the rest of this stuff. I'm concerned about reaching young people, but everybody else as well, because they're in a special bind, but they are the future. And they've also got some answers, and they can also, and they are right now, providing an engine for change. But the youth are especially caught in a bind and in a trap. Last night, in preparing this thing for today, I replayed a song sung by Roberta Flack. Roberta Flack is a great ballad singer, also had been a public school teacher. And she was, this particular song about sad young men. That's the song. In many ways mirrored George Floyd. George Floyd, when he was 17, was with a group of his partners, and they were getting ready to go into their senior year. They were all talking about what were they going to do in life, and they all had their ambitions. Now, Floyd, you saw a big guy, played basketball, played sports, and went to college for a while playing basketball. Floyd said something that spoke to some very noble dreams that a lot of our young people have. And I was crying yesterday when I was listening to Roberta Flack. And what Floyd said was, what he wanted to do he wanted to touch the world. He didn't say he wanted to get rich. He didn't say he wanted to be famous. He said he wanted to touch the world. That's the dream of a humane person. It came from a kind and gentle heart. So Roberta Flack, true to the tradition of Black artists who often pipe in on the future, was singing about a George Floyd before, probably not long after he was born, and was seeing things that would happen down the road. It was beginning to happen, but it wasn't clear. And so she sang about young men. She's talking about young Black men. This applies to sisters too, but especially to young Black men in a patriarchal society in which men are expected to be the leaders and the breadwinners and all the rest of this stuff, and about their dreams. And so she sang this song. She said, she sang about young men who had George Floyd dreams, talking about how they had to kiss their dreams goodbye. She sang about all the sad young men trying to be brave while running from the truth. She sang about all the sad young men singing in the cold, trying to forget they are growing old. She sang about all the sad young men playing at making love, drinking up the night and missing the shining stars. And she sang a hope that their light would guide them home again. Sad young men. George Floyd had a light to do something for humanity. And George Floyd, as his family has pointed out, was a mama's boy. He loved his mama. Those were his last words. George Floyd's light was flickered out by the darkness of cruel, savage, racist hate and the addiction that this system has to arbitrary power. Because when you saw this mad cop with his knee on George Floyd's neck, it was a satisfaction he was gaining from snuffing manhood out of a beautiful spirit. He could care how beautiful it was. Kneeing a person who was handcuffed and helpless, when a fair fight would have taken this guy to pieces. And when you ask, why did he do it? And this is at the heart of the oppression that our people face. Bottom line is, because he could. That's the reality that every Black mother has to face. It can happen just because they can. And so the ethos of Euro-American culture, of Aryan culture, is arbitrary power, which is their demonic definition of freedom. But we have a contrary idea that comes out of our culture. And that contrary idea is freedom is for the purpose of expressing your God-given gifts to create. That is what freedom is for us. And that is what counters this mad system, only one part of this great culture. So the death of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Dante Rice, 13-year-old Adam Toledo's, this has sparked, again, resistance and struggle. And it has, again, put our people in the position of opposing a system that is systemically designed to snuff not only our lives out, but our dreams out. So the nightmare of the rich, the haters, is a nightmare dreamed in a dehumanized mind and culture that worships wealth, whiteness, power, a despiritualized system that is grounded in dehumanization that wiped out most of the planet. But their day for doing that is over. This is the era of the fall of the West and the decline and fall of the United States. You're in it, but you're not of it. And the sooner you get that straight, you'll start to prepare for a new day. So the gentle light that Roberta Flack prayed would shine is a light of the mighty spirit, the light of the human goodness that shines within all of us, especially the poor who've been turned into materially the wretched of the earth, but spiritually are the strongest people gone. As I pointed out in previous show, the people in the Caribbean call the poor great. You better believe it. Rich in humanity, rich in creativity, and sooner or later, rich in power. So when we look at the George Floyds, the Breonna Taylors, they're mirrors of dreams that the system is trying to crush. Breonna Taylor, a lady who was into healthcare, looking out for the lives of people, you know, getting her little life together, blown away by mad police, and still no justice. And there's no justice when you're dead. I don't care what happens. But to see people to just willingly be able to go and snuff out Black lives, that's going to stop. So this is my commitment, lifelong, 61 years. My first concern is the poor, materially impoverished, but spiritually weak and culturally rich. I stand against the vultures who prey on Black, brown, red, yellow, and poor white bodies and suck the life out of them. I stand on the side of the economically weak, but rising in political power is strong. I stand on the side of the morally strong. I stand on the side of righteousness, which our people represent, and the beauty of the souls of Black folks. And this everyday Black people, poor materially and rich culturally, are why I'm here. So while it appears that the rich and powerful own the night and the day, you and I know better. The future belongs to those who know that the power of the people is greater than the power of these oppressive systems. And especially when the people draw on the power that lies within them, to oppose the pimping system that's out to pimp the planet and doing a pretty good job. So we're living in a historical era where the West is fallen. America's in decline. Humpty Dumpty sat on the wall. Humpty Dumpty had a great fall. And nobody is going to be able to put Humpty Dumpty back together again. Who are we talking about? We know Britain fell in World War I and World War II. The West fell. It's foggy in Britain right now. But America fell in North Korea when they were run out of North Korea. I was a brainwashed Marine Reserve. I wasn't there. I was too young, and fortunately wasn't in that. And I woke up in time to never be in it. The Marines called that a strategic withdrawal. I've mentioned this before. If two guys are having a fight and one runs, that means he didn't even get whipped. He wasn't brave enough to stand and fight. He got ran out. Marine Corps had to call it strategic withdrawal. Strategic withdrawal, nothing. You got whipped. That was the beginning of the decline and fall of the United States, and then Vietnam, and then Iraq, and then Afghanistan. So that what we've seen is we're in a new day. And this new day is one that King and Malcolm, Ella Baker, Asanta Shakur, and many others started preparing for. So when you saw the show on King, the emphasis was on how King grew. And because he was sensitive to his people, he stood on the side of the poor. And he began to see that we had to go inside ourselves and conceive of something better than this society. Fannie Lou Hamer, when she was asked, do you want to be equal to white people? She said, I don't want to go that low. I'm not going that low. I'm looking for justice. I'm looking for a say-so. She talked about democracy. Fannie Lou Hamer was a spirit woman, by the way, timekeeper on a Ruleville, Mississippi plantation, woke up by a guy named James Bevels, who was then organizing a student nonviolent coordinating committee. And then she joined the Black Freedom Movement as one of the bravest, smartest, most beautiful sisters you'd ever see. And she loved this song, This Little Light of Mine. And when she sang, you could see the white in her eyes because she was also a healer woman. She had spirit power. And it's that spirit power that our resistors, our fighters, have always combined with political, social, and economic power. And it has given them the power to fight. The motto of the freedom fighter who's Black is you got to have some spirit in there. The spirit's got to be in whatever you do. That's the spirit of God. But as the old saying goes, praise the Lord and pass the ammunition. In this particular case, the ammunition is knowledge, the ammunition is organizing, the ammunition is power. And so it's drawing on the powers of God that are within and the knowledge of self to enable you to take things that are down and that are crooked, bring them up and make them straight. And it is through this kind of understanding, where in an era of choice between two cultures, you understand that your culture is the basis for transformation and change. Amilcar Cabral also said, you measure a movement's chance for achieving liberation by the qualitative difference between the culture of the oppressed and the culture of the oppressor. Part of the reason why the dreams of young boys and girls, Black boys and girls especially, are being killed, and why too many feel that they have to kiss their dreams away, is that some dreams are not coming from the heart of those who are dreaming. That is, some dreams are the dreams of, I'll go it on my own. and I'll get what I can get on my own. And too many of us believe that to survive, it's the fittest that survive. No, it's the group that survives. In the animal kingdom, no little baby lion's going to survive without the protection of mama lioness, who's the fiercest of the two. Because while daddy's asleep, and they all of them sleep a long time, mama is always got an eye open, looking out for that baby. The male does too. And so our survival depends on a lot more than being fit. It depends on the group. But if we think the ultimate dream is just to have something, but not focus on our being, what is it that we want to be? What are our dreams? What is our light? Then sometimes what we're calling a dream is really a nightmare. And it can put us in the position of being set up. And I'm not criticizing the youth who are in this position, because with family and community weakened, then those elders who can give you advice sometimes not around. You haven't seen your father. Or sometimes you're not open to listening, because that guy next to you that's a minute older or a year younger is the one you're listening to, and he's going to give you bad advice almost every time. And so we see too many of us have dreams, good dreams, and we see them blocked. And then we end up, going in other directions and end up in prison. And sometimes in prison with our fathers, because now you have generational imprisonment, because we have a system that if you go to jail and come out, there's nothing for you. They might give you $100 or whatever, tell you to not associate with anybody that you knew before, not give you a job, not put a roof over your head. And so that is set up to send you back to prison. In the UK, where my wife was born, she was raised in Barbados and then United States, back in Britain, living here now. When you come out of prison, you get a roof over your head. You get a job. You hear me? Because they don't want you going back. But in this barbaric system, that's exactly what they want. So I ain't blaming the youth or their parents for the position that they're in. But in making the right cultural choices, then we've got to understand that we have some choices that we can make that can put us in a better position. So when we dream high and we're going for the light that is within, we can overcome that low stuff. It's not easy. There'll be a lot of roadblocks in your way. So African and African-American resistance movements, they've drawn from three major cultural sources for Black people, and many others, but the three main ones have been the mighty spirit that dwells within, the love of family, and the belief in human beings. As your mama taught you, people before everything else. Human life is precious. So the biggest obstacle to drawing from these inner powers for activists, we've talked about fear for the person, but for the activist is the fear of the oppressor. And the false belief that your struggle can't succeed, that they have the power, they will keep the power. Everything that has been up in history has gone down. Nothing stays the same way. One of my favorite songs is, everything must change, nothing remains the same. The young become the old, mysteries they do unfold. Change. That's the reality of life. And so those that are up today are coming down with some help. And so spirit has been a driving force for us in inspiring us to stand up and fight. King, when he was picked to be the spokesperson for the Montgomery Improvement Association, the Montgomery bus boycott, had not, thought about ever leading a movement. And he was undergoing fear. He was undergoing questions, human questions. And he sat down at his breakfast table early in the morning, wondering, is he going to go on? He's a human being. You know what I mean? King didn't seek this position. That's the best kind of leader, And he said, then a voice spoke to him from inside. It said, Martin, stand up for freedom. And every time he'd have a staff meeting, he'd remind his, partners that this is the last time we may see each other, But it was the spirit within that gave him the sense of power. And that has been the motivating force for our people. Old Nat Turner, the dreams that came to him, the spirit within that inspired him to rebel. Harriet Tubman, who was able to negotiate the minefield of patrollers who are out there trying to catch escaped enslaved people, but especially to find and catch her. And as many times as she went through the South and brought back Black folks with her trusty weapon, because she had one rule: forward or downward. If you're coming with me, you're not going back. But how could she avoid all of these slave catchers? How? She was listening to the spirit inside. You hear me? In fact, no rebellion in this country has got off the ground unless it had spirit in it and a political agenda that made sense. So this is the nature of the light that is in all of us. So when we look at this, drawing on the African conception of God to guide us between our choices between two cultures, then what we have to do is, first of all, understand that this force that's in us is in everybody. This God gave everyone these powers. And remember, I was talking about enslavement before, and I made the comment that during enslavement, a number of our historians have observed this, Africans often lived outside of time. They lived outside of time. And you wonder, what does that mean? Their bodies were here, but their spirits were somewhere else. They were being oppressed, but their spirits were free. They were in this world, but they knew they were of another. And this was the reality of the average enslaved person who was Black, because they were African, and that was a deep African belief. And so being out of time meant that they were visiting the spirit world, and the spirit world was giving them direction. Could be dreams. It could be when they were going to the Hush Harbor and putting their head under a bucket. It could be at any time. But the point is, being outside of time enabled them to endure time. It shortened the sense of oppression, but more important, it gave them power because they were in contact directly with God. And these Africans, I pointed this out before, they were spirit warriors. They were soldiers in the army out to fight. And so they used spirit power, their diviners, who were their natural leaders, to also guide them in the physical direction, whether it was a rebellion, Nat Turner, Denmark Vesey, or whether it was an escape plan, or whether it was sabotaging whatever the so-called slave master had, his material. I mean, it was funny how Africans would take a hoe and act like they didn't know how to use it until they broke it. And they've been using hoes in Africa For thousands of years, this was resistance. If you told the African to do left, they do right. If you told them to do one thing, they would do the other. That was the nature of the enslaved African. The enslaved African was in constant resistance, contrary to popular opinion. They didn't just learn how to survive, they learned how to fight. Slavery toughened the enslaved, toughened them, and made them able to endure this oppression. But the key thing is living outside of time also enabled them to envision another time, a better time, a time of freedom, and the kinds of things that they wanted to do when they were free. Note that at the end of enslavement, the greatest amount of inventions were discovered by African people. Only knew how to survive, but didn't know how to live. They knew how to create. And those creative powers were unleashed. So when we look at the African conception of God, one of the things that's very interesting is that the African conception of God is in perfect accord with science. This is something real interesting. And I really want to point out, I'm not trying to step on anybody's toes. If you're a Christian, if you're a Muslim, if you're into Buddhism, whatever your system of belief is, I respect it. I'm not here to try and convert anybody. I'm not preaching any religion. I'm just talking about powers that reside inside of all of us. And so when we look at the African conception of God, quantum physicists, if they were serious and studied it, they would find some explanation for what they call waves and particles. They would find some explanation for what they call singularity. That is, that time before time. That time before creation, which astrophysicists, and an astrophysicist is someone who studies the stars. The astrophysicists say that they can see a wrinkle in the heavens, deep in the heavens. And that is where beginning began. But this is outside of time. You hear me? The African conception of God is consistent with science because these Africans understood these realms. They were the first to invent astrophysics, geometry, medicine, science, but they just happened to be spirit beings. So whereas Europeans would call this energy waves and particles, they would call it an energy, call it vital force, but it's the energy of God. It's a force, but it is also an ethical force. It's a moral force. It's ma'at, as they would say, the rudder of heaven, the beam of earth. So when we look at the African conception of God, I want to look at the Akan, the Bambara, the Twa, but especially the Dogon. And you'll see sitting behind me again are the Dogon Numo twins and the Akan symbol in Yami for none but God, meaning God is first, indicating that I'm going to be drawing especially from these two systems. And because we know, or at least a lot of us know, and most Blacks who are Christians believe this, that God's within them. That's not generally the belief of Christianity, because God is considered to be outside of you. But we put our African beliefs inside of our religious beliefs. But generally, this idea of God within you, what does that mean? What is the God that resides within you? So the Akan, the Bambara, the Twa, they all say this, and particularly the Akan: God is beyond and independent of all categories of time, space, and cause. So these enslaved Africans who lived outside of time, they were living in God's place for that time. And so that's because God is independent of all categories of time and space, which makes sense. God's a mighty, I've seen it as a mighty light, a beautiful light, a great spirit, great energy. The Akan of Ghana say that God, who they call Onyame, Onyame, being consistent in saying that God is outside of time and space, the Akan say that God dwells in infinite time. And then they make this profound statement that God is the ultimate ground of being, the ultimate reality, and the origin of all things, including all universes, because particularly the Dogon and Kemites especially claim, and many astrophysicists today believe as well, that there's not just one cosmos, there are many universes. That's a thought. It hasn't been proven, but it's possible. And also they say God is not subject to change or cause and effect. So heaven, we know, those that have gone to this realm, gifted parapsychologists, talk about there's no time in heaven. There's experience in heaven. Spirits experience things. And then they tell us there are different levels of heaven. And in the highest level, the level in which God dwells, holy, because a part of God is everywhere, in that realm, it's a realm of light. And they say when you pass to the other side, you pass to the level of heaven that your spiritual attunement leads you to. Now, these are thoughts. I'm not saying you have to believe this. But the point is, in heaven, you're outside of time. You're outside of space. And that's why a lot of people who have had life after death experiences could see a lot in milliseconds that would take you days, months, or years on Earth. So this is that realm, you know. The Twa agree with this definition of God. They call God Illani, Illani. And they say God is a possessor of all forces, because they see God as a great force, great energy. And God distributes a part of his or its forces, because it's not a he or she, to everything that God creates. So God is in everything that God creates. Now, again, in quantum physics and other sciences, they will tell you everything is energy. And for African spirit systems, while matter is real, everyone acknowledges matter is real, your body is real, a tree is real, a rock is real. What's most real is what sustains it. And that's the spirit that's inside, the spirit that gives it life. As you saw when we were talking about the African conception of God within, when the Ka leaves your body permanently, you're dead, because that's your life energy, you know? So this idea of force isn't just an energy, it's a spirit. And it is a spirit that dwells within us. So God, being independent of all categories of time and space, enabled our ancestors to commune with God and give them a sense of power. When I share with you my experiences with the light, that is drawing from the God within that we all have, and in that particular case, giving me insight into the family model for just societies. Because when you draw from the inner power within you, you're able to see ahead as well as see behind. And our dilemma as a people is we're being oppressed under a rough, vicious system. And so a lot of us think we don't have time to plan for the future. A lot of us just live in the moment. It's very important to live in the moment. Get as much out of the moment as you possibly can. But it's very important to also use your time when it's free to begin to conceive of what can be better tomorrow. If you have children, you want them to live in a better world. And so when you're drawing on these God powers, as well as your own strong sense of love of self and love of your people and love of God and love of your family and humanity, then that force is stronger. But it's all a question of how settled we are inside of ourselves. Because if we are, then we can use the past to change the present and then begin to create a future. So when we look at astrophysics from the African standpoint, which is the study of the stars, and then European astrophysics, there are a couple of big differences. One, and it ends up in the case of Africans and their conception of God that's different. But the biggest difference is that one, we don't separate the spirit, the concept of spirit from the science. Western astrophysics or Western science recognizes energy as an invisible field, but don't see it as a spirit force. We see that as being key to everything. But the other thing that's really different about our system of astrophysics, out of which arises a deep understanding of God, is we're concerned about origin. We're concerned about beginning. And so African astrophysics is especially interested in the star cluster Orion, because that's the oldest of the star clusters. That's where the stellar world begins, in the Milky Way galaxy. The Milky Way is our neighborhood in the stellar realm. And so we go back to beginning. And it makes sense because we are the first people. So we're going to be interested in beginnings. And so when you combine both the understanding of the root of beginning with a deep understanding of self, you understand the God that resides within you, then you have real power. And the dreams that have been turned into nightmares can become living realities. And for some of us, they are, because plenty of us are living our dreams, but a whole lot of them are having them squashed. So, as we've seen before, the Bambara say that the human being is an interlocutor, meaning that the human being was created by God so God could have a being, an entity that God could communicate with. And that God has placed us on this planet to serve as protectors of this planet, guardians of this planet. And so that's a delicate operation, because we're finding out now with global warming and the melting of the ice caps and everything else, that this thing called Mother Nature is very delicate. And if you wage war against it, Mother Nature will come down on your head. And we're almost at a tipping point now where this planet can become uninhabitable in less than 100 years, unless a new philosophy, I would call it a spirit science, embraces humanity and leads us to have a different view of our relationship to the earth. So when we look at the African conception of God, one of the most profound conceptions come from the Dogon. People in the back here on this side, where you see the two Numo twins. And the Dogon have a system called Adunuso, A-D-U-N-O-S-O. Now, what the Dogon say is that God, who they call Amma, A-M-M-A, created multiple cosmoses through God's mind. Now, this is a real key thing. This is real interesting. God created everything that we know, multiple cosmoses, Mother Earth, and everything else through God's mind, and created through a system that they call a dunaso. A-D-U-N-O means universe. And so means word. So a dunaso is words of the universe. Now, African people, and that includes African Americans, place a very high value on the spoken word. And the word is considered to have great power because it has vibratory force. And that vibratory force, which is the same force that comes from God, especially when it's true, the power of speech comes from its truthfulness. And so while we gave birth to writing, I pointed this out before, we favor speech over writing, and we often write the way we speak. And so as Dr. Jacob Carruthers in his book, Medu Neter said, one of my masters, so the African writing system could be called a walking, talking, doing language. It imitated speech the way a holiness preacher does, you know. It operated out of a hieroglyphic mentality, full of drama, full of action. So when the Dogon say that God creates through a dunaso, or words of the universe, they are referring to a sign system that they use, which is drawn in the sand. And this sign system is the way the Dogon convey knowledge, but is their replication of what they say is a system used by God in creation. And the book I'm finishing now on Seba shows that there are 4 levels in the Dogon system that I'm not going into today, and 3 levels in the African American system of mastery, and they're the same. And that's part of what my book on mastery is dealing with. And Malcolm X went through this system. All of our people who are really creative have gone through this system. And we haven't known that this was a continuation of an African mastery system carried into the United States and the Western Hemisphere, into the Caribbean, into South America. Now, when the Dogon talk about the nature of God, they use a symbol. So this is not to be taken literally, but what they say is that the way God created multiple cosmoses was through Adunaso signs in Ama's womb. And we know Ama, God, is light. It's not physical. So this is symbolic. This is telling you that what God created through God's mind, going through the womb, gave life. And this is the symbol, or the Adunaso, for that. So when the cosmos is created by God, and particularly the cosmos that people on Earth are concerned about is the Milky Way and the Orion stellar system, then it is said that Ama's mind catches things. A lot of people miss what this means. And they say what God catches is life. It catches the life of the cosmos. It catches the life of nature. Now, what does this mean? See, remember, we're talking about African spirit systems, but this is true for human beings in general. Thought is matter. As you think, so you are. You become your thoughts. You got to be careful what name you give yourself, because that can affect what you become. And be careful the names you use, all this cursing and stuff. That can affect what you become. You know what I mean? So this idea of God catches with God's mind is simply saying that God's thoughts are the basis for the matter that comes into being. In this case, the cosmos. In this case, Mother Nature. In this case, human beings. So it's saying that the process that human beings have of thinking things into being, like looking at a bird and coming up with an airplane, going underwater and seeing how a whale and others move and creating a submarine. You understand? Thought becomes matter. And when we're talking about getting out of the bind we're in, this trap of what I call semi-colonialism or racism, or this vulturistic system, then we have to realize we have the power to create a new world. If someone could create madness, we can create something that's healthy. If someone can create crookedness, we can create something that's straight. We've done it, and we're in the process of doing it, but we need to have confidence in our ability to do that. So Adunaso is knowledge based on astrophysics that the Dogon call deep knowledge. You can see why they call it deep knowledge, because it's the knowledge of the stellar region. And we're going to see how this affects us, because believe it or not, we're not just looking at the stars out there. Guess what? That's inside too. Uh-oh. Dr. Jacob Carruthers called this deep thought, you know? He preferred that to philosophy, you know? So when we look at the Dogon conception of creation, it makes a lot of sense. I'm just simply saying creation does begin in the mind, you know? And then that's where form comes from. Now, when the Dogons say that Amma's mind catches all life, giving birth to matter, we see that that's what we're doing. So it suggests that this is another dimension of God within. It's an important dimension because we're not usually aware of this. We're not aware that negative thoughts create negative reality. I've said this before. I don't know how many sisters could be in good relationships if they had a higher expectation of what they wanted, what they deserved. But if they say there's no good men out there, I've said this before, then they get no good men, or they get men who are below their expectation. They may be okay, but okay ain't enough. Once I underwent my 15 months of transformation on these trips that I took for 3 months, a year, for 5 years to work on this feminine side, I finally got it straight. I don't know if I got it completely straight, but I got it straight enough to know what I wanted. You know what I mean? I had me a laundry list. What I wanted in a relationship, you know? And I got it. As you think, so you are. What you wish will happen. Be careful what you wish. Make sure it's what you want, because it's going to face you. You hear me? So this is the nature of this power that is within us, this God power. Thought precedes material manifestations. Your dreams are key to what you can achieve in life, because those are the innermost desires that you have. And they are an indication of why you came here. And none of us hardly remember that compact we made in heaven. Some of you don't even believe there is one. And I'm not trying out to convince you, but you do know everyone has gifts. And if you are pursuing those gifts, you are pursuing your innermost wish, your dream. And when you do that, you're living in heaven. That's me. strategy. Hey, baby, next to God, loving the truth, strategy. That's me. You all got your own gifts, teaching, sharing stuff. That's me. Yeah, writing. That's me. Speaking. I'm doing the stuff I love. That's the joy in life. You hear me? And who cares what anybody thinks about it? As long as what you're doing is right, shut off all those people who are saying, why are you doing that? You could be doing this. You're a poet. You can't make a living being a poet. You're a painter. What can you do with that? You know what I mean? You're going back to that William James stuff, exchange, you know what I mean? Money. Yeah, you got to eat. But the most important thing is you got to fulfill your wishes and your dreams. And you got to live according to your truths, not relative truth. Oh, truth for me is one thing, truth for you is another. No, your truth, which is your gifts, pursuing that. So knowing the African conception of God gives us a better idea of our own powers that lie within us. When we know our innermost wishes or dreams, then that is where the inner light is. In ancient Kemet, the human being as a student, and I've mentioned this before, is described as a five-pointed star. It's called Seba, S-E-B-A. We don't really know how the Kemites spoke, so there's a vowel put in there, but it's spelled S-B-A. And while that's a sign for student and a lot of other things, this book I'm working on now on Seba is dealing with that. It is the description of the human being. And they're saying that the human being is a star, not Hollywood, as I pointed out before, stellar. That's what a human being is. And so when you're teaching a student, you're teaching a powerful force with gifts, but with a light, a special light. The ancients said, we are the miniature universe within the larger universe. We're the microcosm of the macrocosm. We are the smaller reflection of the larger universe. As you really get into science, you'll find that all life forms is made up pretty much of the same elements. So that in fact, just about everything on this earth is a miniature reflection of this larger cosmos. Now, today, because you know, y'all into science, and so am I. I respect science, just not despiritualized science, just not science that's trying to control and out to attack nature and make this place uninhabitable. But science has become a god for many people, you know. But I am a believer in this. If whatever is spirit-based, if it's real, you can confirm it on the material plane. And so usually, like the light that I received on the Mother Principle, it gave me the model for African families. I could go to look at African families and see them all over the place because God had given me the model. And choice between two cultures, what we just talked about, you're going to find, if you haven't already, that fits what's going on in Black communities and in the African world. And it's happening to whites now, but it's not a choice between two cultures. It's their culture that's caused the problem. They're going to have to find a way outside their culture, especially outside of whiteness, which with Bacon's rebellion is the beginning of whites getting special privileges. And these privileges really assimilate them into the Anglo-Saxon Protestant system, though some of them remain Catholics, they end up speaking English. But it says to them, because Bacon's rebellion was a rebellion where Blacks and whites joined together to try and overthrow the plantocracy, because the whites, they were indentured servants. Blacks were in slavery. And so that was one of the biggest fears that this system had, was that Blacks and whites would unite, or that Blacks and Native Americans would unite. And so they made a decision, the rulers of this country, that what they would do is give those whites coming from Europe who would normally come in as French Americans, German Americans, Italian Americans, they give them a white card. And this white card, what does this enable you to do? Step on blacks, wipe out Native Americans, take a little bit of land, while the rest of us who've given you the white card, those 1% that controls 50% of the wealth at that time, we get everything else. But you're not going to be looking at what we got. You're going to be looking at them. Lyndon Johnson had a saying. He said, if you use that N word on white people, they go crazy. You can pick their pockets in a minute. That's America. You know what I mean? So that is the reality of how this system works. And so it conceals before very intelligent people what they should be doing. Like you should be fighting for healthcare. You should be fighting for the government to give you something to supplement that income. King was considering a guaranteed annual income. In fact, Nixon included in his budget. He never intended to pass it though, which is something you can fight for, because this $15 an hour is better than $7, but it puts you in the $30,000 range. That's poverty still. So what you really need, is a system that gives you some wealth distribution. Since the rich have got everything, 1% now controls 60, 70% of the wealth in this country. Jeff Bezos, richest man in the planet right now, and doing everything he can to strangle his workers, just got them to vote against the union, which they need. But because the turnover rate in these Amazon plants is 100%, the working conditions are terrible. Through threats and a variety of other things, he was able to stop that unionization. And so now about 6% of the American workforce is unionized. So people are living on poverty wages. So the choice between two cultures, I think blacks have enough sense to know that we want to change that. But that white card dulls the vision of a lot of white people. They'll end up saying that they support the Affordable Care Act, but they oppose Obamacare. The same thing. It just had a black man's name on one of them. So they're opposed to it, even though it would improve their conditions. So when we're looking at a choice between two cultures, then we've got to really look at what kind of power do we have to make the right choices. And I want to share something with you that shows just how powerful you are. And science confirms this, baby. You hear me? Science. Modern astrophysics confirms what ancient astrophysicists like the Dogons, the Kemites, already knew. When the Kemites said that a human being is Seba, a star, that wasn't a symbol. They were actually telling you what the composition of a human being is. We're the microcosm of the macrocosm. We're the smaller reflection of the larger reflection. Now, what does this mean when it comes to stellar systems? It means, as modern astrophysicists have recently discovered, they've discovered that the human being is in essence star dust. Listen to this. And this discovery was made by a survey of 150,000 stars in the Milky Way galaxy. And they found out that human beings and the stars share 97% composition, same atoms, same elements as you find in the stars. The only difference is humans have more oxygen, because on this realm, we need oxygen to survive. So the essential elements of life found in humans and the stars is abbreviated. It's called CHNOPS, C-H-N-O-P-S, C-H-N-O-P-S. What does this stand for? This is the composition of what constitutes a human being and the stellar realm, which is the same, or stardust. Chnops consist of, you consist of, and the stars do, carbon, oxygen, phosphorus, and sulfur. We just have a greater amount of oxygen because we need that for survival in this particular realm. And each element of life that makes up this stellar composition that a human being is, has been studied through a system called spectroscopy, SPECTROSCOPY. This is a system that enables them to view elements that emit wavelengths coming from each star, and particularly that bring out the light that is within each of these stellar entities, the same light that exists inside of you and me. So when we talk about constructing visions for just society, when we talk about being able to fulfill our dreams, when we talk about taking crooked and making it straight, wrong and making it right, then what we need to understand is that this notion of a human being that you've been sold on in the West, of the individual, the lone individual, is a myth. It is a pure myth because we're all connected. First of all, as spirits, we're all one. We're in bodies that are distinct, but we're one. We're spirit forces that have the power to alter the cosmos in a positive and negative way. And we're seeing that humans now, following despiritualized science and many other things, throwing this earth out of balance. We're the only beings God created that can bring it back into balance. Animals are too smart to throw it out, and they don't have the power to anyway. Human beings only do if they choose to exercise it in pursuit of greed and power. And that's basically why, we've had the global warming phenomenon, tear up the earth to pull out the various forces that cause global warming. So what this says is, as stellar beings, as miniature universes, as miniature stars with radiating light, and all spiritual mediums, when they see a human being, they see light. That's basically what a human being is light. And when someone's in harmony with their light, that light shines brightly. On one level, it's called your aura, but it's many different levels. But this light that is within your ka, which is your dream, your essence, your gifts, all of this. So we have within us this creative power so that young, sad Black men and women don't have to kiss their dreams goodbye. If they know their inner power contained in their inner light, and if they know their identity and love themselves and get out of this bleaching and having to do everything to deform your image so that you resemble something that isn't Black. And you look monstrous in some cases. I remember driving down the freeway, and the sister passed by, very pretty sister, Black as midnight with a blonde wig on. She nearly caused an accident. People were looking, you know what I mean? Because, yeah, she was pretty, but it didn't fit. That blonde wig just didn't fit. I'm not knocking sisters with blonde wigs. So anybody listening to this, I'm not knocking it. I'm just simply saying that when you really see yourself and love yourself, you just see that you're beautiful in your own natural self. You hear me? When you know yourself, respect yourself, and love yourself, when you look in the mirror test is the test of beauty, and you will see that what you see there, you like. And that's part of it. But the other part is knowing this inner power within. And when our young people, especially, when they see their light, then they're not going to be drinking away their life and missing the stars, as Roberta Flack sang. They're going to be able to shine. You hear me? I don't care what the obstacles are. They will shine, but they will shine with the help of others. They will shine when they are taking their gifts and dedicated to something higher than themselves. That's when they shine, because it takes power to change anything. You can't beat power by yourself, but it's in a collective. And when you do that, your mind rises to a higher level. If you look at a king, King entered the movement one way, but as he matured, he evolved another way. The same thing with Malcolm, the same thing with thousands of our people who are active in this Black freedom movement or Black Panther movement or Black power or whatever movement for social change they were a part of. By being dedicated to a cause greater than themselves, then they're able to draw on higher powers. And those higher powers are the powers that will produce change. So I know that for me, my life shined when I underwent an awakening. And then again, when I underwent this transformation through retreats. What I know about change is when we talk about changing society, we can't change society unless we change ourselves. And so the beginning of change starts there. And whatever systems we come up with, and one is identity transformation. Another is a basis for balanced relationships and families. Another is restructuring the society so that we get to a point where a few don't have everything. And we have models for that, going back to the sharing societies of Africa, communalism. We can translate that today, as I was saying earlier, into cooperatives. Cooperative democracy. Chancellor Williams, who wrote two great books, Destruction of Black Civilization and The Rebirth of African Civilization. His greatest book was Rebirth of African Civilization. He traveled throughout Ghana in the mid-50s while Ghana was undergoing independence. And Kwame Nkrumah was beginning to assume the position, at first of the leader of the independence movement and later prime minister. He mortgaged his house to do research on one question. What did Africans want when they were free of British colonialism? And when they were asked that question, they said they didn't want capitalism. They didn't want communism per se. They wanted cooperative democracy. That was their way of saying they wanted the system they had, they were still practicing, but they wanted the government to honor it, which the colonial powers had not, which was the communal order, where the land, air, and water was owned by no one, that everyone had equal access to all of those sources of life and an equal say-so. And then they were telling Chancellor Williams that they wanted their leaders to come to them with national programs, give us your ideas, and then when we give our input, go ahead and move on it, taking our ideas into serious consideration. So when we're talking about restructuring societies, Ella Baker, who one of the two best organizers in the 60s, came out of area of North Carolina where her grandfather owned land. And he subdivided that land among family members. And what she saw was a sharing community. And so what she tried to reproduce in her vision for a just society is what she had experienced in North Carolina. And she always said, you get to know people when you feed them around the table, you know? And she came out of a family that was constantly working with the Black community, trying to improve their condition. So the things we do to change society can start right now. And in fact has. You know, we've done a lot of things as a people, changing ourselves. The awakening process, for example. That's the biggest change that you make, because if you don't think it, you won't be able to create it. So when we draw on these internal powers, it enables us to live in the moment, draw from the past, and prepare for the future. I spend more time on the future than anything, but I enjoy this moment right now. I'm enjoying every minute of this moment. You know what I mean? And I say every period of my life has been a good period. And that's been the trial periods, the rough periods. It's all been good because what do you learn from it, including your mistakes? So it's our choice whether we listen to the voice that's within us, our gifts that tell us what will make us happy and what will make humanity happy. It is our choice whether we'll draw from the best features of our culture, which is, first of all, knowing it, so that we can begin to conceive of something that is better. The best features of our culture that defines freedom as not only creativity, but improvisation. When we appreciate our culture, we'll realize this. Every people have an ethos. That ethos is their way of life, their design for living. It's even in the way they walk, the way they talk. It's your ethos. Aryan ethos is arbitrary power, and it's demonstrated by hundreds of years of history where they've decimated a good part of this planet of human life. There's a great satisfaction that those who have not divested themselves of this view have of exercising power over others. That's what we witness with the death of George Floyd, but we witness it all the time. But the African-American conception of freedom is an expression of our ethos. That is, we exercise freedom for the purpose of being creative, of bringing beauty where there's ugliness. The ethos of the African-American is creativity, not because we're special over any other group of Africans or any other people, but because the circumstances of our oppression required that we had to be extremely creative to pull off this act of creating a new African culture with an African base, with some new additions and some oppressive ones that we have to constantly try to rid ourselves of right under the oppressor's nose, while creating one of the most beautiful art forms on this planet. So creativity is our byword. That's what upset Trump. It upsets, it surprises us because the one people we can't predict is us. We can't. That's the nature of our creativity. We surprise ourselves. So I want to say in conclusion that our creativity, which is our aduna so, our way of going inside ourselves and shaping a new vision, the idea of a new society, is the very basis of our power. Is a way in which we can go inside ourselves and conceive of an old new. I want to stress this, old new, because you draw from the best of your past and then add what you need, discard what isn't necessary. So we can go inside ourselves and draw from an old new economic vision of a society free of poverty. We can draw from an old new view of politics where the people have the say so, and democracy is consensus, male and female having an equal say so. We can draw from a social system in a time in which Africans did not abuse, men did not abuse women or elders or the weak, and children were treated with kindness. The African systems existed for over 100,000 years, operating on this principle. We have to update it. And in a society in which patriarchy rules, women are abused, children are abused, it's going to take some real effort to overturn this. And for those of us who have these demonic forces inside of ourselves, we're going to have to uproot this. Because in truth, the level of our women is going to measure the level of our people, and the level of our children is going to measure the level of our people. And so kindness is at the core of what any just society has to be about. Love is at the core. Love of self, love of God, love of family, love of humanity. And all of this comes through knowing yourself, knowing the powers that reside inside of you, knowing that great history that you have, restoring that amnesiac sleep, and coming up with a sense of historical memory. So to say that all human beings have God within them is not an egotistical statement. It's a statement of truth. And it's a statement of internal power. And when we pipe into this higher force to use our gifts to serve humanity, then we will pipe into the highest levels of the God within us, the highest level of the best features of African and what I prefer to call New African culture. And I think we're in the age where we're in the midst of doing that. I think on the internet, we used to have this situation where the awakened Black people, it was the bookstore and it was study groups. Now it's all these conscious sites. Young people got this thing called woke. Some people are undergoing awakening, you know what I mean? And so whatever the technology is that is being used both for organizing and for study, this is enhancing opening our eyes up, which is one of the meanings of Seba. When you become aware of your gifts, you become enlightened, not with someone else's information, but with the knowledge of the power that you have inside yourself, and then cultivating and working on it. So I hope you got something out of this, the African conception of God, the basis for making choice between two cultures, the basis for fulfilling our dreams, not someone else's nightmare. Hotep. I'm going to go look at these questions or comments. Robin Hughes, facts, creativity rules the day. Yeah. Canada Racing Joy. Yes, doctor, but where are we possibly going in this system controlled by a dominant group that intends to keep Black people in feudalism? Yeah, it's the nature of all oppressions. You know what I mean? That's the nature of the oppressor. That's what they're supposed to do. They're trying to ground you into the dust. That's what you're supposed to do. Where are you going? It's your choice. It's not for me to say. But power only understands power. And if we're going at this purely as individuals, we're going nowhere. But if we're joining up with like-minded souls to engage into some social change, we're going somewhere. So this country is going to shift demographically by 2044, somewhere around there. Majority Black, brown, red, and yellow. You're going to say, oh, that doesn't mean anything. The first problem with us is we don't recognize our own strengths. We've had victories that don't even mean anything to a lot of people. When my wife keeps me informed on the ignorant. What I hear on the ignorant, which is the uninformed internet, it sounds like, we're back in slavery days. I said, oh, really? You know what I mean? Huh? So the question is, what do we do for change? Part of it is change ourselves. This is a part of all movements for social change. The ones in the West have not focused on how to change the philosophy, the thought, attitude, the behavior patterns of people, especially the leaders. That's what Cabral tried to do in Guinea-Bissau. He didn't live long enough to see if he could carry it out. So this is a choice we have to make, work on ourselves while we're in groups. And groups that are worth anything need to have a process for identity transformation as well as spiritual empowerment. They don't have to be pushing a religion, but spiritual empowerment. And then conceiving of what we want in terms of changing our communities, our families, the society that we're in. Right now, you should be putting your 2 cents into this Biden agenda, because this infrastructure plan, which isn't enough, it's 2 trillion, it's a start. And there's a lot of startups in there. And if it hits big enough, chances are they'll keep the Senate. Chances are they may expand the House. And then you've got a better chance for getting more of what you need. And one of the things we need is finances for Black businesses. Another thing we need is Black youth who are not suited for college. Everybody's not going to be going to college. Training programs, as my good friend Dr. Siri McDougall points out, training programs where you get paid to go through training that updates your skills so that you get some skills in computer technology, various things where you can support a family and you can raise your children. So, you know, there's a whole bunch of things that we need to be drawing from with like that. And you got this Black Lives Matter movement or other movements. Get in one. You're not going to change anything on your own. And most of us are beneficiaries of movements that we criticize. I got one criticism, it was only one, on the interview that I did with Menu Ampin on Dr. King, with somebody who said, well, sitting in don't make you a revolutionary, and then contradicted himself by saying, they killed him because he was trying to redistribute wealth. Last time I figured that one out, that's revolutionary. But he was saying he wasn't a revolutionary. You know what I mean? Not giving yourself credit for what you've achieved and building on it. So it's up to us to help produce that change, and it won't be just by us alone. One person asked, how do we balance our need to eat and doing what we love? Balancing between the two seemingly opposing situations, especially when we are doing activism. Yeah, good question. Ideally, it's by being able to do what you love. That's the ideal situation. Everybody can't be in that situation. But if what you're doing on a day-to-day basis, fighting for liberation, and what you're doing to eat, both coincide with the dream, it doesn't have to be exactly the same thing, then that's the ideal situation. And so if you can, do that. But if not, then you have to eat. So you got this gig, you got to do it. But then put your major emphasis on this activism. But if you're going to do that effectively, balance, you know what I mean? Take care of your health, take time to recreate. If you're in a relationship, take time with your mate, you know what I mean? So there's balance in your life. A lot of us, when we work and on jobs that are unsatisfying, then, you know, we spend a lot of wasted time watching television or doing this or that. And I'm not saying it's wasted. I do some of that to rest my brain, you know what I mean? But it takes me forever to find a good movie, you know, but I need to cut back on it. But, you know, the key point is balance. So work out your balance. And one of the things I found very important, take a vacation. I started doing that in 1973. I started every year, usually going to Africa. I spent a lot of money traveling to Africa, you know what I mean? But it was worth it because I'm going home to my people, you know what I mean? And then as I got older, I would time those vacations so that they're closer to when I go back to work, so I could re-energize myself and then know how to vacation. Vacation is vacate. A lot of people go on vacations and run themselves down so much they got to come home and recover from their vacation. That ain't no vacation. You know what I mean? A lot of people like to move around, but, you know, use it to recharge your battery. Michelle Jewell, a bill recently passed to address reparations. And she also says ashe to natural beauty. You got that right. Michelle Jewell, I think our society also teaches the opposite of desires by stating, be care of what you ask for, which I think scares many into not asking. That means be careful, I think, of what you ask, which I think scares many people in not asking for their desires at all. That's a good point. Now, there's truth in that. Be careful what you ask, because if it's not really what you want and you get it, then you're going to be disappointed. But your point is a good point. Let me see. See if I can get up here. Get any more in here. Okay, this was an earlier question. You should have the answer to this. Have your books become available for purchase on Gumroad? Yes, I explained it in the beginning. Go to Gumroad and you can get The Art of Leadership, Volume 1. You can get Return to the African Mother Principle, and you can get The Integration Trap. They're now up on Gumroad, and we now have posted on Gumroad one of the DVDs that can also be downloaded for people who can't process DVDs. It's Mastering the Masters, Dogon and African American Mentoring Apprenticeship Systems, and the other DVDs that I talked about earlier in the show will also be up probably sometime today. There's another one here, Dr. Obitashaka's show, Art of Leadership, Volume 1, 28. Yeah, okay, this is an announcement. There's an announcement here also. Thanks for posting the books. See if there's any other questions here. Okay, a couple of people are just saying that they were able to get in and purchase their books. If there's anything else. Raven Lee Lady, yes, we are falling. Yes, we are in the falling Babylon as the true Eden rises through the leadership of African people. Right on, got that right. It's going to be a hard fight. As I pointed out before, this is a relay match. This is not a 50-yard dash. So if you're expecting everything to happen in 5 minutes, well, good luck. Michelle Jewell, greetings, Baba, Oba, and all in the chat. Francine Leonard, what is the name of the Dogon book you are reading now that you just mentioned? The Dogon book that I was referring to is The Pale Fox. And this is the 4 degrees. It's the highest degree Sodaya, or clear word system. And that's what I was using when I talked about a Dunaso. Pale, P-A-L-E, fox. We have another comment here. See if there's any more questions. Okay, I think that's it. So I want to thank everybody for tuning in, and I hope people got something out of this. And next week, we'll have Menu Ampin on, and we'll be dealing with the assassination of Martin Luther King. So I want to say Hotep, and I've enjoyed this, and I hope you got something out of this.